About midday, Claudine Hale found workmen for the landlord moving her furniture out into the street in the 4800 block of Reisterstown Road. She knew it was coming, but she didn't expect to be evicted today, the day before Thanksgiving. Her landlord, Joseph DePietro, told me that she owes him back rent and about $200 for the water bill, and he had served her an eviction notice. He said I should see the inside of the house, what the Hales had done to his place. But when I tried to follow him in, he slammed the door in my face. Claudine Hale and her 5 children have moved in with her girlfriend, and late this afternoon they were preparing for their Thanksgiving dinner tomorrow. She says she just didn't have the money to pay the rent, and she has been unable to get a job, and she has even been in trouble with the law. I asked her what keeps her from being bitter in this season when we traditionally count our blessings.
When I'm able to get myself together and my family together to straighten the situation out, it'll happen. You know, I can't be bad all the time.
So you still feel there's something to be thankful for?
Yeah, that I've got 5 healthy children, and I'm able to sit here and talk to you, you know, to say that I'm thankful for it.
Thanks will be given around this table tomorrow, in spite of this. I'm Susan White Bowden, Channel 2 News Scene, West Baltimore.
As to whether or not this house on West Lexington is a very, very fine house was the subject of a recent case in court. The tenant refused to pay rent because of certain conditions. The landlord argued those conditions had been met. Judge Motzi didn't know who to believe, so he took a rather innovative approach. He left the courtroom behind, shed his black robe, and...
Okay, let's take that ladder. And I'll go and see for myself it's leaking out. He was an excellent judge when he was in housing court, and we've had really good judges in the last few years, and they've begun to make a difference. People were not too eager now to go to housing court because they expected to get good questions and stern questions, and they should expect to be fined.
Another reason, perhaps, that people are not now eager to go to housing court is this woman. Mary Gardner is the chief prosecutor for housing code violations.
Of the landlords that are actually prosecuted in housing court, I would say that the majority of those every day, the majority that are prosecuted each day, don't come back. And I think that that obviously, I mean, it's still true that the criminal record is something to be ashamed of.
Right. Gardner had a hand in some of the convictions against the men that we told you about yesterday. Fred Levitan's convictions and the more than $10,000 in fines he received, she says, has forced him out of the housing business. But that creates perhaps an even greater problem. This is what happens when a landlord can no longer afford to own property.
As a result, some of I had very few properties, but they were in the inner city, and as a result, I had to end up closing up the properties, boarding them up, and now I am selling the properties in order that the new owners hopefully will be able to rehab those properties.
The landlord, however, is a genuine victim of the economic crisis that's facing this nation. I don't think that landlords were and are prepared for the tremendous increase in costs in utilities, for example. I noted that last week there was a report on the various television stations that natural gas was going to go up 25% this winter.
The man who cannot afford to keep his property in good condition should not be a landlord.
Suppose all the bad landlords who could not afford to keep up their property just decided not to keep their property anymore, and they turned into vacant houses. Then what would the folks in those houses do?
I don't know. I don't know.
The person who should know is Housing Commissioner Jay Brody.
Where we are looking toward, and we're beginning to talk to existing landlords and and new groups, new kinds of nonprofit groups, and some old kinds like the St. Ambroses and the Coils and the neighborhood housing services, is assuming that there's going to be little federal assistance, there's going to be little help for new construction, and we've got to find some new and innovative ways to use the existing housing that's in a city like Baltimore, some of which is vacant, to provide better housing for low-income people.
Kurt Anderson, Channel 2 News Scene. This was a scene just a few weeks ago as we were trying to interview a landlord who has a history of convictions for housing code violations. His name is Fred Levitan, and he had just come from housing court.
I know you got a job to do, and I'm not bugging you about that. Just realize that I'm in the same position.
I'm Kurt Anderson for Channel 2. Can I talk to you a second? Though he caught up with Levitan, he still refused to discuss some of the situations that brought him to court that day. According to city housing officials, his face is a familiar one in housing court.
Every 6 months, the commissioner does publish a list of owners who are most frequently successfully prosecuted in housing court. Some of the names on his most recent list do stand out as being perpetual problems.
That list includes this man, Lyon Miller, for his cross-country apartments, Glenview and Western Run Realties. Total housing court convictions, at least 23 since 1979. Frank Kodak, back in housing court this fall, since 1979, at least 23 convictions. And Mr. Levitan, 56 convictions since 1979, with more than $10,000 in fines. Housing officials have told us that he has filed for bankruptcy. Maryland State Senator Clarence Mitchell has never been on that list, but he still has received some adverse publicity when the News American published these articles on some of his properties 2 years ago.
I had 4 pieces of inner city property. They're all boarded up. Nobody lives in them now because I was losing an average of $2,000 to $3,000 per property per year.
Those are the houses that the News American had the article on?
That's correct.
And like any landlord, perhaps you're a little bit more visible because you are a state senator. They chose you to publicly embarrass at that point.
Right, which then discourages others who are really making a bona fide effort. And I in no way want to cover up for those unscrupulous landlords who don't want to do work, who milk the property and then abandon it. But there are a tremendous number of landlords who are trying to maintain the property under very adverse conditions in this city.
And some of those landlords are represented by this man, Ira Cook.
The vast, vast majority of landlords in Baltimore City are doing a genuinely fine job in maintaining their properties. Yes, there are bad landlords in Baltimore City, but there are no more bad landlords in Baltimore City than there are tenants who routinely vandalize, destroy, or do not maintain the properties in which they're living.
Owning property in the inner city calls for tremendous creativity and tremendous cooperation between the owner of the property and the tenant. If you don't have that kind of cooperation, you end up in the situation that I ended up in.
No, the landlords cannot be totally absolved from some of the city housing problems, but I think it's wrong for the media and for many government officials to focus on the landlords as the root cause of the problem.
Who is at fault, the tenant or the landlord? The same question a Baltimore City judge had during a recent case. So he took the entire court to the house in question to find out for himself. Tomorrow night, we'll tell you his answer. Kurt Anderson, Channel 2 News Scene.